All righty, and we are live.
All right, well, welcome everybody out there in Radio Land. Welcome to the Galesburg Orpheum Theatre. My name is Ross McIntire. I'm the technical director here, and you are watching Technically Speaking with Ross McIntire. Now, this is the first time we've done a live format of this, so thank you, Joey and Aaron, for keeping an eye on things behind the equipment. That's usually where I am, so this is interesting. But it's going to be great. We've been really excited to do this all week, and so we're really happy that you've all joined us here. Principally, the first thing that we are going to be discussing is the piano. Now, you may have noticed we have this lovely, beautiful grand piano behind us here, and that piano has been with the theater for quite a while. I think it's been almost 20 years, if not more than 20 years. Since we came by this piano. And over those years, as you may know, the Orpheum stage is somewhat small. So we've always kind of had a challenge as to how we move that piano around and how we're able to make the most of the space we have, given all the things we have in that space. The piano can't really leave the stage, or it could not move the stage until very recently. Back in 2018, the theater was able to, as part of its massive, 100th anniversary fundraiser, we were able to come up with enough money for, as you may remember, a plethora of renovations and upgrades and jewel shining projects, as we called it, referring to the Galesburg Orpheum's nickname is the Jewel of Galesburg. One of the projects, however, was to alleviate the stresses placed on both the piano and the piano movers, the people who we would hire to move it, by purchasing this device. It was made by a company called the Keyboard Transportation Technologies LLC. And they made a device called the Smart Move. The Grand Smart Mover, in fact, is its full name. Take my keys off here. So as you can see, we have this beautiful Kawai grand piano. It's a little 7-footer. It's an RX-7 to be exact. And we have this KTT Smart Move underneath of it. Now, the what I call the schmutz of it has already been done. We've strapped the piano to the device. I've taken off the pedal board, and we are pretty well ready to pick it up. I always like to do these exhaustive safety checks first, because it is quite an undertaking picking up a piano with any device. You'll see that we have this heavy strap that runs back here all the way over to the treble bend on the piano. And what that does is keep it in place as we pick it up, because when we pick up this piano, the treble end of it comes up, being the lightest end of the piano, comes up, and as it's turned vertical, it will then settle it down onto this dolly here. That's what that's called. Now you'll also notice that the arms come over to lift it from either side back here. And then, of course, the strap reaches over to the other arm. And so those are the 3 points of contact from which the piano is picked up. And then through a complex hydraulic mechanism, it turns it on its side and settles it gently into place. And then you can further strap the piano to it if you're moving it out of a building. This setup right here, there's multiple setups you can have with this kind of device. This setup is to move a piano around one building in one place. And so before we get going with that, Joey, you
for those just now joining, do you want to, because a couple people came late here to the show,
yes, of course.
You just want to explain what we're doing here and why you have it strapped this way?
Yeah, so this is our piano mover once again. Today's main demonstration is going to be showing how we invert our Kawai grand piano. It was always such trouble in the past to do it, as we had to hire in a moving company, and they would have to bring in 3 or 4 people to all help move this piano by brute force onto its side and roll it against the wall. This device was purchased as part of the renovation projects we did in between 2016 and 2018 to make it so that one person could move our grand piano around the stage. And it's quite a lovely little device. I'll shout out again to KTT LLC. That's Keyboard Transportation Technologies, and they built this device for us. It's the Smart Mover. Has 3 little wheels. I've got the wheel locks on. It's got an outrigger arm that goes out towards the treble side to counterbalance when the piano starts to be picked up by this device, so the whole device doesn't just flip on its side. And It's got this handy little control box here with a little telephone cord. You can take it wherever you might want to go. So I'm just going to give it one more little check here. I like to call them my paranoia checks, just to make sure everything is where it should be for us to lift this device. It's one of the first times I've ever been watched doing it, so that gives the added anticipation of ooh. So we have ensured everything is nicely strapped in, that all elements are secure. I like to give it the little wiggle. If it wiggles when you try and wiggle it, you aren't done yet. So, okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to begin. Once I have given everything one more good and hard look. Okay, so it will go very slowly. So we'll stop at various points, and I can kind of point out what's going on. One by one, I'll have to take the casters off of these feet, and then we'll safely move them out of the way. There's nothing more dangerous than a caster just rolling around underfoot. So, as we begin, press the F button and away we go. So it starts to lift the whole thing at once to take the weight. And as it takes more of the weight off of these individual casters, we can reach in, but not before they're ready. There we go. And lift them out. So we'll pause here. Nice thing about this control box is that it has a magnet on it. So let's place those off to the side where we know where they are. And then we can continue. So at this point, the outrigger arm is keeping the whole thing from flipping on its ends. These casters will soon almost have no weight on them, and it will all be on one side until it settles over. So we'll continue going up. Nice thing about this cord is you can go just about anywhere with it because of its positioning. And as it starts to slowly make its way up to the fully extended position, at this point, the weight of the piano is starting to settle into the actual frame of it. So we continue towards the fully upright position. And before long, it is settled completely in. So at this point, the piano is up, and it only took one person less than a minute, I think. So additionally, once you have this up like this, there is a second strap that you can put on it to ensure that it is properly secured to the device. My bearings here. Here we are. You can throw this over the top. This is mostly for when you're leaving the building with it. If you're going to have this in a truck, you're going to want to make sure that you can roll it around in the back of a semi and not be worried about it rolling off of this rack or anything. All right, so there's that. And then you can take it. It's a little, there we go. It's always tough trying to reach into this little space. Get that in there. There we go. So we take this over. And so this will allow us to roll it around safely. I wouldn't want to roll this much farther than a few feet if it wasn't strapped in like it's supposed to be. And so you give it a few quick cranks. That's usually enough. Okay, so now we can release the brakes on the individual casters. And I can come back here and loosen the outrigger arm. Now, the outrigger arm is specially designed to be an integral part of this machine. The outrigger arm slides into the bottom of the machine up until this little point here. And at this little point, there's a tab of metal welded onto the top. That trips a switch on the inside that's a safety switch. The device will not operate unless this outrigger is completely inserted to that little T there on the metal. And then here at the other end, It's your adjustable foot, so you can put the tension on it so the device can balance. Now, the nice thing about this device is that not only can one person operate it, one person can move it. These are very, very sensitive casters. They do exactly what you want them to do, sometimes a little too hard. So it's always good to move it slowly. But as you can see, I'm moving this with one arm. It's remarkably easy to move about. The other nice feature of this arm is that there's a little keyhole drilled into it here, and that allows it to mount directly to the machine, so you're not worrying about where you put the outrigger arm. It's right here. Slip that in there, and it's good. Cool. All right. So from here, then, you can transport the piano all over. At this point, we take the legs off as well, but since we're putting it right back down, we'll leave the legs on. And honestly, you can lead it any which way you want. I'm just going to give it a quick spin here so you can see the whole look of it. It's really that easy. All right. Gonna get this repositioned from when we put it back down. Sometimes getting it to move in the exact direction you want is a little, takes some finesse. But here we have it, our inverted piano, and all that it takes to do that. As you can see, one person down from a team of 3 or 4 can invert the Orpheum piano any old time they want. The nice thing about this device is that it is adjustable. These arms that all pick up the various parts of the piano are adjustable for different sizes. We have this 7-foot here, but this can accommodate up to a 9-foot grand, as we were to understand. And there are even special attachments to use to kind of shim each of these arms up to the thicknesses of different types of pianos. We have slightly thinner blocks, actually, if we were ever to have a Steinway. So for those of you who are looking to sport the Orpheum, you can donate a Steinway to us, and we'll be able to use our new feet. In any case, this mover, like I said, was acquired during the renovation period we had in 2016 by KTT. Is a company for keyboard transportation technologies. It's the smart mover. As we were told by the person who builds them when he delivered it to us, that this is the 27th one that he ever built. And one person builds these in a shop in, I believe, Pennsylvania. And we have more information about that we can link to in the comments and things like that. So at this point, I want to get my chair back. A second. There's my chair. Even though it's a one-person job, sometimes I do work up a little bit of a sweat doing it. So, but once again, I want to welcome everybody who may have joined us late of my little cheery welcome. I'm Ross McIntire, technical director here at the Orpheum Theatre, and this is Technically Speaking Live. And this is kind of a new format for us, but we wanted to explore different ways we could bring you the stories and the histories and the fun facts about the Orpheum Theatre in a more kind of all-encompassing format where you can comment in or email in what have you with questions, which then Joey will be handling and passing along to me to answer for you. But at this time, I think just to kind of get the ball rolling on that, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Orpheum Theatre for those of you who might be a little less familiar about the story of how we came to be here at 57 South Kellogg Street in Galesburg. When this theater was built, there was a livery stable on its site. Those of you familiar with Galesburg's history may know that the Custer Hotel is on one side of us, which is now the Kensington, and that's the south side. And then on the north side of the theater was the Bank of Galesburg. These two buildings were built shortly before the Orpheum, and they therefore left a very limited space for the Orpheum to stand. And so the dimensions of the theater were entirely dependent upon the dimensions of the space left between the bank and the hotel. And for those of you who have been backstage or even just in the auditorium and marveled at how such a big, beautiful theater can be so small and yet still beautiful, that has a lot to do with it. The people who designed the Orpheum Theater were George and C.W. Rapp. They were a pair of brothers who had an architectural firm in Chicago by the name of, you guessed it, Rapp and Rapp. They were prolific builders of vaudeville theaters back in the day that the Orpheum was built, and in fact are also the architects of several notable Chicago buildings. The theater game was where the money was at, though. At the time the Orpheum was built, they were building these theaters with such speed and efficiency that they were pretty well sending the various teams of tradespeople from town to town in kind of waves, keeping the theaters being built. We know this because our immediately preceding sister theater, the Al Ringling Theater in Baraboo, Wisconsin, was the rap theater that was built immediately preceding the Galesburg Orpheum. We know that because of the staff there had told us stories of how they had found telegrams in their old records indicating that, once the Masons were finished in Baraboo, they were to carry on to Galesburg, Illinois, where the next construction would be happening. Then immediately after us was built by the Raps, the Lincoln Square Theater in Decatur, Illinois, which is another extant theater. I should have said the Baraboo Theater, the Al Ringling Theater, still does stand, as does the Lincoln Square Theater. I think the Lincoln Square Theater, however, is under a bit more dire straits. So look them up and see if you can give them any support as well. The Orpheum, though, was opened in August of 1916, August 21st. To be precise, it was a Monday. And the theater was built by the Raps to be kind of a veritable house of enchantment, as it was described, I think, by the papers. And they really had a strong belief in theaters being a shrine to democracy, as they called it, where the rich and the poor could rub elbows. And I often have this dumb little joke that the distance between the boxes and the galleries must make for some pretty long elbows in 1916. But the prices for tickets were, by today's standards, very small. The cheapest, of course, being a nickel. You could have standing room or be sitting up in the far reaches of the balcony for a nickel. For a dime on an average night show, you could find pretty good seats in the main floor and the front balcony. Maybe even better seats for 15 to 20 cents. And for a night show, if you had 50 cents, 2 quarters to rub together, then you could sit in any of the boxes located in the second level. Now we call that the mezzanine, but back then they would have all been boxes. There was no continuous long section across the back wall like we know now. And with that 50-cent ticket price, not only did you get to sit in viewed luxury up in the boxes, you also got a glass of ice water that the ushers would bring to you. And of course, with their white gloves, which I always thought maybe could protected their skin from the condensation, who knows. But the theater was a vaudeville theater to start out. And a lot of people do ask us about the small amount of space we have on stage. That's one of the reasons that it is necessary for us to be able to move this piano from place to place and to be able to turn it on its side. The stage being the size it is, of course, it was owing to the spatial constraints. But one of the things that made vaudeville theater designers less worried about stage space was the nature of vaudeville itself in terms of its set pieces and set decoration. Primarily at the time, though there were enormous opera houses that would have had massive, very complex set pieces and wagons coming on and off. I mean, we've seen in Phantom of the Opera when they roll on an entire large cutout of an elephant, life size. Vaudeville stages often, especially in smaller towns like these, where they would have had smaller volume of large-scale traveling shows, often were not very large in stage because they could use painted drops. That was actually the primary mode of scenery when the Orpheum was first built. In fact, there's a very famous scenic studio in Minneapolis that produced a lot of painted drops and painted flats, which a flat is where it has a wooden frame. A drop is just tied from above and draped down. There's a lot of these flats that we actually still have, and in later videos we'll be showing them off. But that kind of scenic design is what allowed for even the smallest stages to be able to put on world-class vaudeville acts. And that was one thing that the man who had commissioned the Orpheum to be built in Galesburg, who was a local theater impresario by the name of William J. Olson, he believed that Galesburg deserved a first-class theater for world-class shows. And Mr. Olson was the proprietor of a small theater on the corner of Cherry and Simmons Street. It was called the Gaiety Theater. And I could not say when it was built, but by the time the Orpheum was being planned from, between 1914 and 1915, William J. Olson, who operated the Gaiety, thought that most of the theaters in Galesburg were not fitting of the finest acts of vaudeville. And as vaudeville was becoming very popular and very profitable, a lot of people across the country were looking to cash in on this vaudeville craze. And so large, well-appointed theaters like these were being, like I said about the Raps, being thrown up in every city they could be found in. Now, one of the nice things about having an Orpheum Theater in your town was that it carried with it the designation of being a theater on the Orpheum Circuit. And the Orpheum Circuit was similar to how we think of today as restaurant franchises. There would be Orpheums independently operated by different people all across the country. And then there's some in Canada as well that are still standing. And those theaters were all, while they were run locally, they were administrated, and especially the programming for them would have been, kind of handled on a national level so as to organize these tours. So when the Marx Brothers went out on tour, and they might have had a contract with the Orpheum Circuit. In fact, that was something that they had, there's a letter that that Groucho Marx wrote to, I believe it was Harper's Magazine, talking about how they got their nicknames in Galesburg. Certainly not the Orpheum, since the Orpheum wasn't built until after they had their nicknames, but there are many different conjectures about where the Marx Brothers received their nicknames, but the one certainty being that it was in Galesburg. But they would have signed a contract with the Orpheum Circuit and been able to very easily take the trains all across the country. That's one thing that made Galesburg's Orpheum very well situated, was that the nature, surprise, surprise, of the railroad in Galesburg, making it very advantageous to have shows come through here. As the tours would leave, say, Chicago, coming out towards the west, they would leave Chicago and maybe pick up a few shows on down the BNSF or the Santa Fe railroads, but one way or another, they would hit Galesburg, and that was where the paths to San Francisco or Los Angeles would diverge, and you could take the trains then from Galesburg in almost any direction to be able to, as long as it was west, and to be able to bring theater out into the far reaches of the American continent. So that was one of the things that made the Galesburg Orpheum a very smart choice for the people of this town. I believe it was a pretty large effort, not only by Mr. Olson to raise the money and to put his own money into it, but I believe that O.N. Custer, the famous businessman of Galesburg, had a large hand in it, considering the hotel and the bank, two concerns that he was very heavily involved with, were right on this block. So why not the theater too? The vaudeville era was rather short, as we all know. Movies came barreling right along, and so the Orpheum closed very briefly in the 1930s for a pretty heavy renovation. They closed the backstage from that point. In fact, the stage closed about 5 feet to my right on back. It was completely abandoned then for almost 50 years. And they had a permanent screen hanging right here to my right, and then that was just about all there was on stage. They were certainly had other things going on back here, storing the popcorn machines and things, but from that point on, it was no longer a live theater. It was just a movie theater. Into the 50s, there were even more insensitive renovations. It was made more modern. They took the pipe organ out at that point that they had only just put in the 30s. So that only lasted a few decades. The mezzanine was completely retooled, as I'd mentioned. The seats have been replaced numerous times throughout the theater's history. And progressively, the decorative elements and all the gold leafing, all the ornamental plaster was either taken down, let go to ruin, or just painted over very roughly. By the 1970s, there were other movie theaters in town, certainly quite a few of them. Principally, the largest and most destructive to the Orpheum's prestige would have to be the Twin West Cinema. And the Twin West, for those of you who don't know, used to be two separate theaters, the Colonial on the south side and the West Theater on the north side. Funny it wasn't on the west side. And when vaudeville fell off and the movie era was starting to get going, it was very advantageous that there were two theaters right next to each other. And the West purchased the Colonial and had a two-screen theater. By the 1970s, the Carasotes movie company not only owned the Twin West Cinemas, but had also purchased the Orpheum, and so owned both, separated only by a parking lot between Prairie and Kellogg Streets. By the end of the 1970s, the Orpheum had been kind of relegated to the role of the secondary movie theater, more for premieres or other movies that were just being shown, maybe reruns or B movies, things like that. And it got so bad to the point where in 1983, when it was closed, they had one more movie to show. It was it was 1982. And it was the 1982 thriller, The Sender, which I have yet to find a person who has heard of that movie when I tell them the story. It was a thriller film that was being put on, and they even advertised in the Galesburg papers that it was going to be the last movie that was shown at the Orpheum. Orpheum will close after this movie. It was all laid out in plain English right there. And so the staff had been prepared for a large rush of people, knowing that the Galesburg's classic Orpheum movie theater, which had stood for, well, by that point, 70 years almost, was due to come down, and 2 people showed up to the last movie that was shown when it was a movie theater. What a shame. They had actually popped all the popcorn they had on hand, expecting large throngs of people. And so, as it was told to me by somebody who worked here back then, they passed out garbage bags full of popcorn to those 2 people and then to the staff. Everybody came into the theater, sat down, and watched the sender. The saddest part about that, I think, was the fact that they had already started to send marquee letters from the Orpheum over to other theaters that Carasotes owned wherever they were needed, and they forgot to leave an S to spell the sender. So when the Orpheum got its send-off, the marquee said the Zender with a Z to get it as close as they could get it to an S. And at the end of the night, one of the staff climbed up on the ladder and took off the Z and the E and the R, and so leaving the marquee just reading the end. And they left that there for some time. There's a picture of it somewhere. And the Orpheum was ready for demolition after that point, but with the intervention of Knox County and Prairie Players Civic Theater, as well as the state of Illinois and their generous granting process, the Orpheum was acquired by Knox County. The Knox County Civic Center Authority Board was set up to administrate it, and Prairie Players Civic Theater led the fund drive to rescue the Orpheum, ended up coming into possession of just about $3.5 million to renovate the theater back then. And they were able to reopen in 1987 in the fall, with the Henry Mancini Orchestra being the first live show. I believe later on the first locally produced musical would be South Pacific, put on by Prairie Players Civic Theater. And from that point on, the theater has remained as a continuously operating community venue. Prairie Players isn't involved in the administration anymore. In 2006, we incorporated as our own 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we've had a lot of programming since then that we've put on, including the Red Carpet series, which is now called the Orpheum Theater Presents. And we also have the YES program. YES stands for Youth Entertainment Series, where we put on free children's programming to local schools, as well as our Throwback Thursdays and our tenants and many other things that we do nowadays. So at this point, we're going to move on to our Q&A section. I imagine a few questions have piled up. So Joey,
oh sure,
take it away. What do we have?
Yeah, totally. So our first question, by the way, you can keep those questions coming if you want. We can get to them if we got time. So our first question comes from Hollis. And he asks,
hey, Hollis.
he says, for the light system, do traveling shows bring their own kind of light packs? I know, for example, Roscoe Supergel in comparison to the Phantom of the Opera Green. Or is the lighting coloring controlled by smart technology or actual gel installation?
Well, all excellent questions. The magic of touring is that if you can carry something on your truck, you might as well bring it with you to kind of take down, kind of decrease the margin of error for whether or not the local theater is going to be able to put on a show to your specs. So oftentimes shows will bring specific lights that they need for certain effects. More often than not, the shows we get will bring in certain electronic lighting, not the conventional lighting that uses polyester gel sheets. Usually when a show brings in their own equipment, it'll be LEDs or what we call movers, which are moving head instruments. They can have spotlights, they can have colors, they can have patterns that they can shoot onto the floor. Some can even project images. You may have seen Monmouth College with Doug Rankin when they did lights for Godspell. They brought in this enormous projector so we could project the Innkeeper's logo on the back wall and Godspell and fire and all manner of fun things. And most shows will bring in things like that because that's the sort of thing that is worth a show bringing. Oftentimes shows will only begrudgingly bring the gels that they gave you in their packets just in case you forget, so they can scowl at you while they give you the gels you're supposed to get for them. Oftentimes though, those ones they bring will be very integral to the performance. Bill Blagg, one of our good friends who has performed here a few times, he brings a few of his own lights just because he has very specific, lighting needs and very specific visions in mind. And so when he brings his lights in, it's very important that his lights be used exactly as he wants them. And that's great, because that really does make sure that the show will be delivered in the best way possible. The lights we have here are mostly what would be referred to by lighting people as conventional fixtures. They are incandescent lamps inside of these large aluminum housings with reflectors and lovely lenses that do all the things that you would need a light to do. But by today's standards, they are considered old school. We do still gel them. We didn't even make enough of a technological advancement to get scrollers, as they call them, which is a fun little era in lighting technology. But yeah, the Orpheum is always striving to keep up with the technological advancements. Of course, being a nonprofit, you can only come by so many of these new smart lights, as they're called, at a time. We do have a suite of LED color change lights that we bought with grant money from the ETC company, Electronic Theater Controls, back in 2011. But as it is now 2020, those lights are considered a bit dated, though they still do work. If you've ever seen a show with the psych in the background, it's colored up, you'll know that that's why. So thanks, Hollis, for that question.
All right. So question number 2, Naomi asks, did the company in-service Ross on how to do all of the piano mover operation, or did he have to attend a class?
Well, we were lucky enough. Thank you, Naomi, for viewing, and thanks for the question. We were lucky enough that the machine itself was transported here by its designer and manufacturer. He brought it in a pickup truck with a topper on it when he drove it to us, and he actually helped the staff here, get it all put together on stage, because it required some assembly after transport, and he did all of that to ensure it was done correctly. And then he actually stayed here for a couple hours and explained to us every little way to adjust it, the ways you can adjust the lift arms, the different ways that you can then put different adapters on it to use different pianos, different skid boards, things like that. And he did actually sit with us for a while and make sure we were very comfortable using it before he left. And then, thereafter, for the next year, I think every single time I did it, I would spend most of the time just checking to make sure I did it right before I would actually do it. So doing it as quickly as you saw me do it took several years to be comfortable with. Even though this machine is very well built, very well designed, and is very strong, it's able to pick up a much bigger piano than this. It is something that one should never forget, that you should respect large objects when they're being picked up and set down, because of all the things that could go wrong if you don't take the proper precautions. So thank you for the question, Naomi. That's great.
All right. There's also a part 2 to that question, also from Naomi. She asks, how can we donate to the Orpheum during this closure due to COVID?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. As a nonprofit community organization, we are always very appreciative of community support, and small donations, whatever amounts, are always such a good help to us. You can find information on donating at our website, which is www, look at me, so old school, .galesburgorpheum.org, O-R-G. And there's a section under support. You put /support at the end, and then there will be plenty of information there about the various ways you can donate to the theater. Principally, our Give Us a Hand fund drive for operational support is our main fundraising arm right now. When we are closed due to the pandemic, operations are the most important thing for us to have support from. So if you are interested in donating to us, please visit that page. Once again, that's www.galesburgorpheum.org/support. Thank you.
All righty. Our next question comes from Mike, and he asks your opinion on the following question.
Yes.
What is the most important trait for a successful tech director to exhibit?
Lord. Well, if I were to think about the most important, I'm like a contestant member reading the question back. Well, gee, honestly, attention to detail. Sometimes it's maddening. I'd like to give a shout out to one of my dear old friends, Roger Schoonover. He was an old stage technician and building manager in this town who taught me just about everything I know about this place. And he once told me that if you were to take a level and lay it on the edge of the stage and keep trying to balance the stage perfectly, you'll never get there. But it's important to try. And I think that's kind of the value of making sure you are paying as close attention to everything that's happening around you as you can and still being able to see big pictures. For example, like I was talking about with this piano mover, making sure that you've double and triple and why not quadruple checked all safety equipment, for example, before you use it. Similarly with the fly system, that's the enormous network of steel cables and pipes and chains above our head that suspends lights, curtains, set pieces, anything you might imagine. Is a very useful system, a very strong, well-designed system, like anything we use, but it is very important to be constantly paying attention to the way things are hung from it. Don't, for example, let certain organizations, if they may not be experienced with the fly system, hang things with fishing line, which if something is about the weight of a fish, great. That's the thing you want to hang with fishing line. But for example, you should never hang anything heavier with something that doesn't work that well. And if you're not paying attention, sometimes people can just do things like that because they think, oh, it's good enough, you know. It's also a matter of being able to notice when maybe the HVAC fan might sound kind of funny. That might be an indication that maybe the belts on it are starting to get worn out because then they're maybe squeaking a little more than usual. See, some people when walking through an old building like this might dismiss squeaks and little sounds you hear, but there are sometimes, especially I've been here for almost 8 years now, I can safely say with a little bit of pride that I know what everything sounds like, and so if something sounds odd, I can usually pick it out. But that does come with time. You can't just, I don't think, be born with that sort of intuition. Spending enough time in a place to be able to be familiar with its systems and respect their limitations, I think is probably the better way to phrase that. So that'd be my opinion. Thank you. Good question.
All righty. Next, Orly wonders,
Orly,
what is the funniest thing that's happened to you since you've worked at the Orpheum?
That's a good one. The funniest.
That'd be funny.
It's pretty funny. I don't remember how we came by them, but there was once a time in the theater where several very vague princess piñatas from Walmart or Hy-Vee, wherever these things are come by, showed up at the theater. I couldn't really remember exactly why, but they ended up leaving quite a mark on staff culture as well as renter culture more than anything. One of them was a very vague princess. It was supposed to kind of encompass many different kinds, from the popular princess corporation that we won't mention. It was called Connie, the Conventional Princess. And it would look like several of them so as to avoid copyright infringement. And it was April Fool's, I believe, back in 2015. 2015, that's right, because it was after Mr. Tim Holmes, our dear colleague out in the office right now, hard at work with box office things. He and I had kind of, especially back then, kind of a fun little back and forth for pranking, very, very light pranks, but he got me in a very spectacular way with these piñatas once. He knew that I had a lot of things to do one day in the cleaning closet. So what he did was he put a ladder in the cleaning closet, and he put the paper mache doll at the top of it attached to a rope. And when I opened the door, it would pull her feet out from under her, and she swung down and came right at me on this line. And that was in the dark too, which made it even more fun. I literally thought there was a little monkey jumping down at me with its flowing golden paper hair sailing out of the darkness. And so I drew a cat face on it because that's the only thing I can draw. And I hung it up in the fly system just as this creepy little doll, peering out of the darkness. And I ended up forgetting about it for well over a year. It might have almost been 2 years until I was alerted to its continued presence by the children dancers of the Dancers Studio group out of Monmouth, Illinois. And they started asking me about the creepy doll up in the fly system, which reminded me it was even there. And so now I actually hang it off of the genie lift we have here on stage, just as kind of a fun little prop. That's probably the funniest thing that ever happened to me, though, was that doll sailing out of the darkness and hitting me in the chest. Well, it had no candy in it either, so what was the point? I had to keep it. I couldn't even smash it. So I'm sure there's other things I could come up with given more time, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. So thanks. That was a good trip down memory lane, that one.
All righty. The next question comes from Nick, and it is, has it always been part of the Orpheum design for the pit extension to spill into the first few rows of seating, or was it changed over by the addition of more seats?
It would it would have been in the 1988 renovation that they would have had those sorts of changes made. In the theater's initial design, there wasn't a pit cover of any kind. If you've been to enough shows at the Orpheum over the last several decades, let's just say, you will have seen the orchestra pit open. In the 8 years since I've started, more often than not, the orchestra pit has been covered. A few shows we've taken off certain sections of it, but the orchestra pit now is semi-permanently covered with our row of platforms. When they first designed it, the Orpheum orchestra pit was more regularly used. Is the whole reason that there's an entire orchestra pit on the front. There would have been a small vaudeville band, which we had a modern vaudeville band here a few years ago. The Paragon Ragtime Orchestra came in and played. It was a small, less than, I think it was about 14 people, definitely less than 20 people, playing music along to silent films. It's back when silent films were the dominant mode before sound was developed for movies. They would have either played, a full band would have played along, or at the very least, somebody at a piano would have accompanied it. In the 30s, when the Orpheum acquired a pipe organ for its silent movies, and then later for its talking movies to supplement those, the orchestra pit then kind of fell out of use. Old photographs that I've seen that have been preserved by the library show that the orchestra pit fence used to come out around the organ and kind of encompass that. The organ was taken out in the 50s, like I said, and so that is no longer the way it is. In the 80s, though, they found that just as much as there was the need for an orchestra pit to be able to have some kind of orchestra while you're doing a musical, for example, more often than not, shows in my time here have needed more stage space more than they've needed an orchestra. Nowadays, given the ease of playing a soundtrack through our electronic sound system, we don't need live music as much. It's always nice when we have it, but getting that many musicians together can be a chore. So more often than not, we have that covered. The orchestra pit cover works in conjunction with what we then call the extension, which is what brings the stage all the way up to the front row of seating. It used to bring it all the way up to the front row being row A, but that was so close that people couldn't be seated there during shows. So the administration in 2011 took out row A in order to have more room for people to walk in front of the extension. So that is a very recent addition, but it is one that has been, I think, very good for the theater's ability to do all sorts of shows. So good question. Thank you for that.
All righty. Next question comes from Hollis again. And he says he has an active interest in doing what you do someday and wonders what schooling is necessary or encouraged to become successful in the tech world. Well, any good theater education of any kind will include all aspects of theater arts, we call it. I think that somebody who is well-versed in all manner of theater, it can be simply called a theater practitioner. And so I think that always the best thing is to pursue a good education in being a theater practitioner, unless you are really serious about developing a very specific set of skills. If you were to be a lighting engineer or a rigging technician, and that's people who hang things or secure things from the ceiling or from other elements, a sound engineer, a wardrobe manager, any of those things, and even acting and musical direction, things like that, choreography. All of these are elements of production, but I think that the most well-rounded theater education you can get the best. If you do have a specific drive in a specific area of theater you're really interested in pursuing, pursue that. Always, get as much education as you can about that. Sometimes certain things are easier to do just with more technical, training, like getting, licensed as an electrician. Then you can go off and be a stage electrician in almost any venue, in the country, in the world, if you have that base knowledge about just the common electrician's work. Same thing for people pursuing audio design. Often good to have a very strong background in audio, both in live sound recording, any sort of that kind of production. It's always good, though, if you're unsure, you just know you want to be involved in theater. The best thing to do is to, if you are going to go to a four-year university, they almost always have theater departments, and you can kind of get your feet wet volunteering for different, aspects of production. And then if you find something you're good at, you love to do, it's always good to be able to recognize that and focus on it, because that's the best way to get your career started is when you're young, because a lot of aspects of production require you to have the best ability you can to be able to lug things around or climb ladders or any sort of thing like that. A lot easier when you're younger than when you are older, as my knees can attest. So yes,
it's always important to get the proper training. So that's always something I would definitely encourage.
All righty, thank you. So another question from Naomi. She asks, what is the most rewarding historical item you have found at the Orpheum?
The most rewarding. That'd kind of be hard. I have found a lot of artifacts laying around, as have all of us who work here, Aaron and Tim and Joey, as well as all the different volunteers and past staff members we've had. There have always been contributions to what I like to call the stack. Here's one of our more modern examples. Can't see it very well. Wish I had something to put behind it. Oh, here we go. Actually, this will serve as good a thing as any. This is a piece of paper. Any old piece of paper will do, it's fine. Yeah, here we go, perfect. Sorry about that. This here is one of the little strips of film that we found laying around in the projection booth. Now, this is one of the ones that we were lucky enough to find laying around on a table. I found this back in 2012 when I was first familiarizing myself with the place. This would have been one of those little strips that you would have had before movies, or maybe between two movies. I wish I had something to backlight it, but I'll describe it to you. It shows several snowflake designs. It probably would have been something for winter. They would have had right before the movie saying Happy Christmas or whatever it would be that they would have written on those. And so this was obviously a cutoff. They had a lot of this roll laying around, but the more valuable thing, let's see, there we go, is this little clipping right here. And you can't really see the image unless I shine a strong light through it because it's a little dirty, and we haven't wanted to put it through any sort of modern cleanings. We're afraid it would delete the image from the cellulose there, but you can see it's got a couple of strange little figures there in the dark. This is a still, we believe, because of the other pieces of film we found laying around under the floorboards next to it, from the old film South of Suba. And that's one we also found a title card to. It said it was made, the film was premiered in 1921. And so this little clip of film is one of the pieces of evidence we have that the theater has been showing movies, not only for the time it was specifically a movie theater from the 1930s on, but it's also kind of a testament to ever since the introduction of movies, of any kind of movie technology before the talkies came up, is that they were showing movies wherever they could. The Orpheum's projection system was probably a little bit more rudimentary back in the 20s and 30s before they really got into the movie era. But this one's pretty valuable in that sense that it can show us a direct tie to the past. It's even got the start of a little burn bubble there where it was probably in front of the projection bulb a little too long. So this is one of those ones that we have been preparing to kind of try and catalog them best we can before we might potentially send them off to places where they might be able to clean them up a little more properly and preserve them for the wider audience. So that'll be something to look out for us to be posting on our social media in the near future. Another small little object we have laying around is this. It's this little brass ring that is set in a plate. You can kind of see it in profile there. It sits like that. It's got a swivel, and not a swivel, rather a little hinge. What this little brass ring, you're kind of jingling. What it used to do is there are four of them set into the front of the Orpheum stage. And anybody who's ever been on the Orpheum stage or been close to the front of it will have seen these little brass, rectangles laying in the ground. You may think, what are those for? Because you pull on them and they're firmly attached to the ground. It's not a trap door. It's not nothing. What they used to do is, because the projection booth is all the way up in the attic at the back of the theater, and the image has to be projected all this space and at that very extreme angle, that before projectors could be keystoned, as we call it now, to kind of tilt the image so that when it arrives at the projection surface, it is straight. What they used to have to do is, instead of keystoning the image, they would keystone the screen, and they would take the bottom of the screen, pull it forward so it's kind of at an angle. The audience is over here, and the screen would actually tilt down like that, and they would tie the bottom of the screen forward to the floor so that it was at that angle, and they would set that angle before they would do whichever movies they were going to do, and they would make sure that was properly tied up that way. And when we renovated the floor not too long ago, and we ground it down, to the bare wood and repainted it, one of the things we did was replace all of these little brass rings with new ones that are in a little better shape. This one's kind of got the this actually is the best one we have of the old four. This one, the corner is missing next to the screw hole, but it is the one that we have in the best shape. So our one of our volunteers, Mr. Gary Morgan, polished this up really nice for us, and we have it sitting most days in the little display cupboard out next to the box office. And those are probably the two smallest and most fun things I have immediately on hand. So we'll, I think, move along to the next question. Thank you for that, Naomi.
All righty, awesome. So I think that's going to conclude our Q&A for this stream, and as well as it was a perfect little segue into show and tell. So if we didn't get to your questions, we'll be sure to add them to the list for tonight's broadcast at 7:30, which will be in the exact same place. If you can make it, then we'd love to have you, of course, again. But for now, why don't we bring down the piano and show them how to bring it down in reverse order and how we get that thing all rigged up.
All right, so for this demonstration, I will call on the assistance of our voice of questions, Joey, to help me get the casters repositioned once we get to that point in the process. So we kind of just place the casters out generally where they're going to be, because when the piano is right about to land on them, that's really the best time to install them. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to guess where they're going to go. So we leave the casters kind of just ranged out. Okay, so the piano is ready to be brought down. We remove, as always, the outrigger arm. Here it is, and this is nice because at this angle you can actually see exactly how this part of the process works. The other side is what you saw when we started. So the arm is fed in into the machine, and you might be able to hear here the little click it makes. Click, here we go. That little safety switch on the inside to engage, and once that's firmly in there, that's how you know you're ready. Kind of give it a little shake. Make sure it's not got any slack in it. Now, we don't tighten it down all the way until we make sure everything else is good, because once the casters are locked in place, then everything's settled and you can bring that to its final tension. Lock up this back caster for us before we get going. Now, before we bring it down, it's important to loosen the safety strap, because the safety strap is only for moving, and if you tried to put the piano back down with the safety strap still on, they would have to fight with each other, and I don't want to know who'd win that. So we loosen the strap enough to remove it. Yeah, right. We kind of take that off, and for the time being, just kind of drape it across the floor all the way back here. Keep it out of the way. Okay, we take a brief moment to ensure that everything is still secure, even though we've all been sitting here the whole time. Like I said, it's always important to look anyway. The day you think you did look is the day you didn't. So we can bring that outrigger to a good tension. The casters here shouldn't ever leave the floor, of course, but it's always easy to tell if it's got enough tension, because the casters give you a little bit of play as enough of the weight is being taken by the arm to kind of compensate for when this part of the piano comes this way, which without this outrigger, like I said, would be very scary to see. So we are about ready to go. Just going to make sure all these casters are visible to us, so we are aware of their presence. And we take our lovely magnetic control box, and we are ready to go. So Joey will be supervising those casters, and I'll be on this side. And after one more little look-see, make sure we're good, we're ready to go. Now, it begins very slowly, and it continues, well, very slowly, because it's important that the piano never be jostled. You know, we had a question that came up when we were thinking about what questions we might get, and since it wasn't asked, I'll tell you that the piano usually needs to be tuned after it's been moved too many times, because while this machine does handle the piano very gently, any motion that might adjust the tension, upset the tension rather, of any of the strings is going to adversely affect the tuning. a lot of, we'll pause here. A lot of people who have used our piano since we have this mover have not necessarily needed it tuned because they couldn't notice any discrepancies themselves. I can tell you, however, that when we had the old method of moving this piano where a team of people would come in and kind of, as gently as they can manage while saving their backs, lower it to the ground, it almost always required tuning after that. So at this point then, we can kind of start getting our casters in their final positions. One of the things about the backmost base caster is you almost have to like sneak the caster under the foot as it comes in. That, of course, is why I gave that to Joey to do, so he could have the most fun with it. So we like to take it slow just to make sure we're getting all the casters in their proper place. You can kind of slip it under there, and then we're well on our way. So they're all in their casters, so one by one, the piano will start making contact with the floor. The nice thing is the noise this machine makes changes in tone when it's done. And there we are. At that point, the weight is entirely off of the device. I can take this arm here and jiggle it, so that's how you know it's good. The outrigger arm can now be loosened, but not taken off because we still have the machine in the downright position, and therefore we need to be careful of the machine itself just getting upset. But we can loosen these straps and free the piano, so you can see where that makes that contact. And once the outrigger has been loosened, we can just lay it down. As we gently draw the piano mover back. Now, before it comes back too far, though, got to take this little pad out. Because if you don't do that, once you take the piano mover away from the piano, it just falls on the ground. It makes a loud noise. So we take the strap off. We come over here. We loosen the locks for the casters. Makes it much easier to move when the casters are unlocked. And then we kind of rotate it out so as to avoid damaging anything under the piano with these legs. And once the mover has been extracted, then the outrigger arm can be retightened and the machine can be brought back up to its upright position and stored against the wall. And at this point, the piano is fully down. The next step would be to attach the pedal board, and then it would be ready for the tuner or the musician, whoever is scheduled for that day. And once again, we have had two people for the simplicity of the caster, but if one person was the only person available, one person could put the piano up and down. Just might take a little longer to get the casters right. So I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration here of our KTT Smart Move piano moving machine. And we thank you for joining us here for our first live Technically Speaking with Ross McIntire. And I want to remind all of you to please go to our website, to the support section, and donate to our Give Us a Hand fund drive for operational support. We will be back then again with you this evening at 7:30 p.m. For round two. We'll have some other things we'll discuss as part of this, but we will once again be demonstrating the piano as it's just so fun to do. So Joey, you have any final parting words?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you again, Ross, for talking and for taking questions. Just a reminder, everybody, we will be going again, like he said, we'll be going live again right here on our Galesburg Orpheum YouTube page tonight at 7:30 p.m., where Ross will be taking more live questions as well as showing you some of the things that he's been showing you now, plus maybe more. And thanks for watching.
All right, thank you all so much.
See you tonight.